Good morning. We are the reporter for today and our topic is all about chapter 4.3, Pugidlawin, Balintawak or Bahay Toro. Start of the revolution against Spain has been officially commemorated in recent years as the Cry of Pugidlawin. The supposed site of Pugidlawin is situated in Barangay Bahay Toro, Quezon City and is memorialized with a tableau of life-size ugly rigid Katipuneros during their settlers. The inscription on the marker at the site says that in the vicinity of this place, Andres Bonifacio and about 1,000 Katipuneros met on the morning of August 23, 1896 and decided to launch the revolution against the Spanish government in the Philippines. They affirmed their decision by tearing their settlers symbols of the enslavement of the Filipinos. This was the first cry of the oppressed people against the Spanish nation and was given force by means of arms. In 1896, according to the National Historical Commission, the house and yard of Juan Ramos had stood on this site. The ride took place on August 23, 1896 at the site known as Pugidlawin, situated in what today is Bahay Toro, Quezon City, which in 1896 had been the house and yard of Juan Ramos. The name Pugidlawin came to be used in the 20th century to refer not just to one of the contending cry sites but to two. First one site and then another. Today the Pugidlawin marker is in Bahay Toro where Juan Ramos had supposedly lived, but in previous decades, as will be discussed later, Pugidlawin was said to have been 3 kilometers or so to the northeast where Ramos' mother Melchora Aquino or Tandang Sor had lived near Pasang Tamo in Barrio Banlat. Definitions of cry. The debate has long been clouded by lack of consensus on exactly what is meant by the cry. The term has been applied to 3 related but distinct events: the Pasya or the decision to revolt, the Pagpupunit or the tearing of settlers, and the Unang Labanan or the first encounter with Spanish forces. These 3 events, to state the obvious, did not all happen at the same time and place. When and where the cry should be commemorated thus depends on how it is defined. Historians' insights in terms. Teodoro A. Agoncillo equates the term with the Pagpupunit, which he says happened immediately after the Pasya. Isagani R. Medina also takes the cry to mean the Pagpupunit but says it happened before the decision to revolt had been taken. While Soledad Borromeo Buller takes the traditional view that KKK veterans took. She says that the cry should mean the Unang Labanan. It was the Unang Labanan, as Borromeo Buller points out, that was commemorated by the first monument to the events of August 1896. The main inscription on the plinth read, "Alaala ng Bayang Pilipino sa mga bayani ng taong 76." And a smaller plaque bore the date ika-26 Agosto ng 1896. The statue was erected in Balintawak, the largest and best-known barrio in the general area where the Katipuneros had congregated in August 1896. The name Balintawak was often used as a shorthand to denote the general area, and the cry had become popularly known as the Cry of Balintawak even before the monument was erected. Nobody professed in 1911, though, that the statue marked the exact spot where the first battle had been fought. It was simply in Balintawak on a plot donated by a local landowner, Thomas R. Gales. Evidences. The first battle, an encounter with a detachment of the Guardia Civil, was fought on the date inscribed on the Balintawak monument, August 26, at a place about 5 kilometers northeast of Balintawak, between the settlements of Banlat and Pasang Tamo. A few sources give the date as August 25, but as both Borromeo Buller and Encarnacion have shown, the most solid contemporary sources confirm August 26 to be correct. The Balintawak monument continued to be the focus of yearly cry celebrations, held on August 26 for decades. In the 1960s, however, the official definition of the cry changed. Officially, the cry ceased to mean the Unang Labanan and was defined instead as that part of the revolution when the Katipunan decided to launch a revolution against Spain. This event culminated with the tearing of Cedula. This definition, which is more or less in line with Agoncillo's, thus embraces both the Pasya and Pagpupunit but excludes the Unang Labanan. A number of sources, however, indicate that settlers were torn on more than one occasion in different places, presumably because Katipuneros were arriving to join their embryonic army over the courses of a number of days, and many wanted to proclaim their rebellion, their commitment to fight Spanish rule in the same way. It is even possible that the main pagpupunit preceded the Pasha, but then it would have been premature because the revolt might have been deferred. It seems more likely that the official definition of the cry assumes that the largest, best remembered act of defiant settler-touring happened soon after the Pasha had been taken and in the same vicinity. Decision to revolt. When? It is almost certain that the decision to revolt was taken on Monday, August 24, 1896, after a lengthy meeting that had begun on Sunday, August 23. Many veterans later recalled August 23 as the historic day, but others specifically remembered the decision had not been taken until the early hours of August 24, and this latter date is given by at least four important sources, namely the Biak na Bato Constitution of November 1897, which mentions the current war initiated on August 24, 1896. The Constitution's signatories included at least one participant in the cry, Cipriano Pacheco, and several others who would have read circulars and messages from the revolutionists in Caloocan in August 1896. Carlos Ronquillo, in the first chronicle of the revolt against Spain by a Filipino, written in 1898, sparked the Guinness with the words, "Sa isang araw ng pagpupulong sa Balintawak, ika-24 ng Agosto, 1896, kaarawan ng pasimulan ang revolusyon." The Liga Filipina Memorial erected in Tondo in 1903 by the Samahan ng May Pag-asa, a patriotic society named in Bonifacio's honor, whose members included several KKK veterans. The inscription on the memorial lists many of those who attended the famous meeting addressed by Rizal on July 3, 1892, and alongside Bonifacio's name it records that he was Supremo del Katipunan cuyo el Juaner Greto de Guerra contra la Tirania el 24 de Agosto de 1896. Santiago Alvarez in his memoirs Ang Katipunan at Paghimagsik, written in 1927 but based, he said, on records entrusted to him by the Katipunan's first leaders and fighters. Internal evidence suggests that Alvarez's account of the meeting on August 24 is based on information he obtained from Ramon Bernardo, a Katipunan leader from Pandacan who was a participant in the cry. Conclusion. When? August 24 has now been confirmed as the date of formal decision by the discovery of a contemporary document, a page from what Bedina calls the Borador ng Pulong ng Kataas-Taasang Sanggunian, or rough copy book of the Katipunan Supreme Council. Since a proper Borador was not to hand in Caloocan at this tumultuous moment, the Supreme Council communications were drafted in some kind of farm ledger, used under normal circumstances to record crop yields or sales. The text is therefore written across printed columns that are headed Mais, Mani, Kamote, and so on. The document is dated Caloocan, Manila, ika-26 ng Agosto ng taong 1896, and it begins as follows. Ayon sa pinagkaisahan sa ginanap, pulong ng kataas-taasang kapisanan, ika-24 nitong umiiral na buwan tungkol sa paghihimagsik at sa pagkakailangang maghalal ng magsisipamahala ng bayan at mag-aakay ng hukbo.
Who decided to take revolt? The decision to revolt, says the Borador document, was taken by the KKS Supreme Assembly, first constituted in December 1895. The assembly was described by Emilio Jacinto as the primary and paramount body within the Katipunan. Ang una at lubos na kapangyarihang ay hahawakan ng kataas-taasang kapisanan. Milagros Guerrero was suggested that the Supreme Assembly decision needed to be confirmed or ratified by the KK Supreme Council. Such a two-stage pasya, however, is not corroborated by the Borador, document which indicates the Supreme Assembly decision was final. Bold swear. Bonifacio and the members of the Katipunan Supreme Assembly were on August 25 or 26. We only need to establish where the Assembly met on August 23 and 24. Unfortunately, this is not great help. The sources are still conflicting. They broadly agree that the leading revolutionists went first to Caloocan, Poblacion, after leaving Manila and then headed eastwards via Kangkong towards Pasong Tamo and eventually Balarada. Sources still offer no accord. However, as the whereabouts of the leading revolutionists on the critical dates on August 23 and 24. Some sources say they left Kangkong as early as August 23, whereas others say they were still in Kangkong as late as August 26. Possibly where? Apollinario Samson's in Kangkong, Caloocan. Melchora Aquino's place near Pasong Tamo in Banlan, Caloocan. Juan Ramon's place in Bahay Toro, Caloocan. Caloocan or Balintawak. They referred in vaguer terms to Caloocan, meaning somewhere in the municipality of Caloocan, or to Balintawak, meaning some distance to the east of Caloocan Poblacion, in the general area where Balintawak is the best known place. For the present purpose, these vaguer sources Kangkong, Apollonio Samson. In 1917, a Katipunan Veterans Association, the Labi ng Katipunan, erected a memorial on the site where they remembered the decision to revolt had been taken at Apollonio Samson's house on the Kaingin Road in Barrio Kangkong. Sa buok na ito, the inscription stated plainly and simply, ipinasya ng KKK and MANB ang paghihimagsik noong ika-23 ng Agosto 1896. Ceremony at the Kangkong Marker. The Labi ng Katipunan was headed by the veterans Bilio H. Santos, who had participated in the crime, and Claudio P. Carrillo. Why Kangkong evidences? The writer Nick Joaquin described the spot in the early 1960s, a time when it was still lonely, obscure, isolated, and very hard to find. It is in the interior, reached by no street. You have to use footpath, and the place itself is pure provincial countryside. Giant tikbot, a mango and tamarind and santol trees keep guard over the marker, which is always in shadow, and guesses that this was deep woods in those days. Veterans testimonies Kangkong. Kangkong Pasong Tamo in Banlan and Bahay Toro. 8 out of the 10 individuals who mentioned either Kangkong, Pasong Tamo, or Bahay Toro recalled the decisive meeting and the grito as having taken place in Kangkong. This was the location specified by Tomas Remigio, Julio Nakbil, Sinforoso San Pedro, Guillermo Magmasangkay, Veteran testimonies Melchora Aquinos Pitamo. Only one veteran, Pio Valenzuela, ever maintained that decisive meeting took place at Melchora Aquinos Place near Pasong Tamo. He also once recalled in 1911 that the pasya had been taken in Kangkong. If his testimony on that occasion is counted, the tally for Kangkong will be 9 out of 10. Veteran testimonies Juan Ramon's Bahay Toro. The other veteran, probably Ramon Bernardo, remembered the decision as having been taken in Bahay Toro, but he did not say Juan Ramon's place in Bahay Toro. He said it had been taken at Melchora Aquinos Place, sa buok ng Sampalucan, Bahay Toro. It therefore seems his recollection was simply mistaken because Melchora Aquinos Place was near Pasong Tamo in Bobonlan, where pasya took place. Unless and until any solid evidence is found to the contrary, Therefore, the only possible conclusion to be drawn from the veterans' testimony is that Pasha was taken by the Supreme Assembly at the house of Apolonio Samson in Kangkong. Veterans' testimonies pagpupunta sa Kangkong. Veteran Cipriano Pacheco later recalled, whilst the Supreme Assembly meeting was at the Samson House crowd, Bonifacio wanted to announce the momentous decision somewhere everyone could gather around and hear him. He led the crowd from Samson House to place near, malapit pa doon, where there was an often-filled malaking kaparangan. Pagpupunit sa Kangkong, how did it happen? He told them, the momentous news, brother, he shouted. The decision is go ahead with the revolution. Mga kapatid, ang pinagkaisahan ay ipagpatuloy ang paghihimagsikan. It was the decision the crowd wanted and they cheered. Do you swear? Bonifacio asked them. To reject the government that oppressor us. Yes, the crowd wrote. In that case, Bonifacio urged them, bring out your cedulas and rip them up as a symbol of defiance. Kung gayon, ilabas ninyo ang inyong mga sedula, personal at punitin, tanda ng pagtalikod sa kapangyarihan. The Katipuneros were fervently headed his cult, weeping with emotion, and they ripped their cedulas to shred. Bonifacio raised the cry, mabuhay ang 2 decades after the revolution. The celebration of the cry was not a continuous issue. Ceremonies were held both in Kangkong, where KKK veterans agreed the Pasha had been taken, and in Balintawak, where the famous statue of Apollo waving flag-holding Katipunero stood to commemorate the unang labanan fought a few kilometers to the northeast. Why Pugad Lawin Balintawak? Balintawak, they insisted, in the strict narrow sense, a particular barrio to the east of Caloocan, with delineated boundaries, was not where the cry had occurred. The cry had occurred, they said, at a place known as Pugad Lawin. In the contemporary records, alas, and on contemporary maps, the name Pugad Lawin cannot be found anywhere. Isang pagkakamali ang sabihin mayroong Pugad Lawin sa Caloocan. The scholars of Ronyogi Calderon decided after a fruitless search was way back in the 1920s. Dr. Pio Valenzuela, not valid. The foremost proponent of this argument was Dr. Pio Valenzuela, who had been the vice president of the Katipunan and the outbreak of the revolution, and who had laterally, in the early 1920s, been provincial governor of Bulacan. He was a prestigious figure but not a good witness to history. He changed his history more than once in 1911. As we noted, he said the decision to revolt had been taken at the Apolonio Samson House in Kangkong. In 1970, he had testified in court that it had been taken at the Melchora Aquino's house on the road known as Ataan, malalim in Pasong Tamo, also known as Pakpak Lawin. But in his memories, which Agoncillo says that from the early 1920s, he said it had been taken at place of Melchora Aquino's son, Juan Ramos, and Pugad Lawin. Pugad Lawin evidences. Valenzuela recalled the Pugad Lawin was in Pasong Tamo, sa loob ng Nayong Pasong Tamo in 1928. Valenzuela went to Pasong Tamo to commemorate the cry together with 4 other well-known KKK veterans, Gregoria de Jesus, Bonifacio's widow, Bricio Pantas, and the brother Alfonso and Cipriano Pacheco. The newspaper La Opinion carried this photograph of the group who, according to the caption, were standing around that exact spot, marked with an X, where bolos had been stored just before they were used in Alfonso.
On this occasion, it therefore seems the cry was taken to mean the unang labanan which had indeed taken place near Pasong Tamo. Philippine Free Press, 1930. At around same time as this commemoration, in either 1928 or 1929, Pio Valenzuela, Bricio Pantas, and Cipriano Pacheco issue a joint statement to the effect that the cry had taken place not in Balintawak, where the monument had been erected, but it place now by the name of Pugad Lawin. This is the statement as published in the Philippines Free Press in November 1930. Melchora Aquinas, but it was any doubt that Pio Valenzuela identified Pugad Lawin with Pasong Tamo and specifically with Melchora Aquinas' place was dispelled in August 1940 when together with two other Katipunan veterans, Genaro de los Reyes and Sin for San Pedro, he returned there with Eulogio B. Rodriguez and Luis Serrano of the Philippine Historical Committee, forerunner of the NHCP, to verify the location. Before posting the photograph, the party marked the site of Melchora Aquino's house with the tin wooden stake on which somebody placed their hat. The photograph caption is the contemporaneous because Caloocan did not attain the status of city until 1963. It is possible the description of the site, Sitio Gulod, Banlat, Caloocan City, reflects how the location was known in 1960s rather than in 1940. Fortunately, through Luis Serrano wrote a detailed account of 1940 expedition, which makes it absolutely clear not only that Valenzuela and his companions believed the cry took place at near Melchora Aquino place, a spot they remembered as Pugad Lawin, but also that their geographical point of reference, their starting point of locating the exact spot was Pasong Tamo.
The trip to Pugad Lawin in 1940, Serrano recalls, was organized by Eulogio B. Rodriguez in his capacity as chairman of the Philippine Historical Committee for the purpose of first, verifying the date of the cry, second, ascertaining the truth of a report that Bonifacio and some members of the Katipunan had buried certain important documents of the Katipunan there, and third, locating the exact spot where the house of Tandang Sora stood. After picked the three veterans, Serrano relates the party negotiated the distance by car up to Pasong Tamo and hiked about an hour to Pugad Lawin.
We found that Pugad Lawin was not about 30 to 40 feet higher than the surrounding territory. As the remaining vegetation indicated, it must have been well covered with trees during the revolution. It was a good observation point from a military point of view because it commanded an excellent view of the whole country of the south and west, the only direction from where the Spanish force could be expected to come. Some of the big trees which formed landmarks of the place were still recognized by the Valenzuela. To local men, Serrano continues aided the party of digging around an ancient tree stump in the attempt to find the buried Katipunan's records. There was efforts were in vain otherwise too. The expedition had been highly successful because it confirmed first cry took place at Pugad Lawin on August 23, and second, it was from the house of Tandang Sora that Katipunan members in Port of Chalice, the right of Spain, Bonifacio and his followers arrived at the house of Tandang Sora, Pugad Lawin. In afternoon on August 22, Tandang Sora San Juan A. Ramos, a member of secret organization, as it was not natural for the Katipuneros to secret their notes of the dates given here wrong. Valenzuela had correctly remembered in 1911. The Katipuneros arrived Tandang Sora house on August 24 and August 22. Serrano's account does not mention Bahay Toro, where the site of Pugad Lawin is now officially marked. Valenzuela had directed the expedition in 1940 to Bahay Toro. They would not have started their hike at Pasong Tamo. They would have worked somewhere much closer. In his memoirs, had already mentioned in a single line that has modeled the whole of Asia, Valenzuela relates that the decision of revolt was taken at the house, storehouse, and yard of one Isidoro Gincillo and Isagani Medina have argued that this means Pasha's site was not Melchora Aquino's place, but at the completely different location in Bahay Toro, 3 kilometers to the south and west, Pasong Tamo, and yet Luis Serrano, who personally went with Valenzuela to Pasong Tamo in 1940, and who later translated in veterans' memoirs, did not draw such interference in the course of the matter. Serrano's doublest believed was that Valenzuela specified in the memoirs as Elmer's that the Pasha site was the Pugad Lawing, meaning the wooden knoll, a likewise place in Hawk's Nest, to which they had hiked together from Pasong Tamo. Pugad Lawin, it is officially recognition of Pugad Lawin wherever it was. Agoncillo was the preeminent historian of the day, and 1890s revolution was among his special field. It was mainly upon his advice, it is commonly said, that the Philippine government ruled that the term of Cry of Balintawak should be discarded in favor of Cry Pugad Lawin. This change was signaled formally in 1963 by President Marcos' acclamation 114 and declared the 67th anniversary of the Cry of Pugad Lawin on August 23 will be a special public holiday in Quezon City, where the event took place. With the event of August 23 proclamation, 143 went to Pasha at unang labanan against Satan's definition of the had become the official definition of the committee relayed its findings to the Government Historical Agency, then called the National Historical Institute, which someone in visit the site deliberated in matter, and declared that to it to be right on the occasion of the next commemoration of the crime on August 23, 1894. The NHI placed the mortar of the site in Seminary 1, Bahay Toro, where it was used for Isaganis, the previous opponent of the Bahay Toro in this one. The battle was Isagani or Midnight, represented the Bahay Toro, more fully and with more documentation than anybody else has before received. First in the paper he delivered at the conference in 1993 and that his meditation of Ronquillo's memoirs, he paid the bishop make his case for the site because nobody has proof the place of actual site. The site that